Hey, what's up everyone? So today we're going to see what this new Mac Studio that I just got, how it can handle a real color grading workflow. So I'm going to create a sequence, a real world style sequence. I'm not just going to line up a few 1080 clips or 4K clips and just hit play and see if they play back. I am going to make a 30-minute sequence. I'm going to apply your typical grade to these clips. I'm going to have some Blackmagic RAW, 12K, some 4K, some red files, some ProRes stuff, some H.264, H.265, different resolutions. I want to see how it performs, how it can handle grades, how it can handle exports, things like that. And just so you guys know, this here is the Mac Studio. I got the M1 Max with 32 gigs of RAM and a 1 terabyte internal hard drive. So it's not the Ultra, because I think personally that's probably overkill for most people, including most colorists. Most colorists, not all colorists, most colorists, that's overkill. But the M1 Max I think is great. And also, for what most people do, what I do, I've been looking at reviews. I've been seeing how the M1, I have a 13-inch MacBook Pro M1, how that handles certain workflows. And I guess we're going to see how this handles the typical color grading workflow in DaVinci Resolve, just to see what it looks like.
This intro intentionally left blank.
Okay, so here we are, and what I want to do today is, what I've basically done is set up a project, and I made this as much like a real world project as possible, just so that I can see how the Mac Studio performs with a typical grade like a colorist would typically work with, or maybe even an editor. And what I will say is, if you're an editor, I think you'll definitely be able to see how the system performs, considering I've actually added a typical grade to all of the shots. So what I didn't want to do is just throw clips in here and leave them in here bare with no adjustments, no corrections, or just do a quick, unrealistic short color correction and then hit play, and then obviously everything would play back smoothly. So everything has, some nodes kind of like this, some basic adjustments. Some have a few more than this, some have a few less than this. And what I have is a mixture of Apple ProRes 422 in HD. I have some red footage in 6K or 5K, like this, some red raw footage in 6K, some 5K red raw, some Blackmagic 12K, and some Blackmagic Ultra HD in raw, some H.264 in 4K, and some H.265 in 4K, with several adjustments applied to them. And we're going to see, just so you guys know some of the settings as well, I have the red debayering and decoding to half res premium. And then right now we're going to see both, but right now I have my sequence set to 1920 by 1080. Just because I know some people work in 1920 by 1080, even if the footage is in 4K, just for playback quality and to make it a little bit easier on your system. So first off, this video is for anyone who works in the film industry, whether you're an editor or a colorist, and you just want to get an idea of how this might perform in a more real world environment. And I'm basically just going to hit play and see how everything plays back. So as expected, this ProRes 422 HD stuff plays back smoothly. And then here we are in this 6K red raw media, which this is what I'm going to mention in a little bit, playing back at 14 frames. And I found that this kind of, changed a little bit from 19 to 20 frames per second. You can see the playback up here. And then this is the 12K Blackmagic RAW. This, of course, played back smoothly, even at full debayer quality. And then the 4K obviously also played back smoothly, even have a blur going on there. And something else about all this footage is that besides the nodes of a typical grade that I applied over here, I also applied the Blackmagic design grain, 35 millimeter grain to the entire image. Which, as some of you know, anytime you apply grain, that really, wears down most systems. So the entire, all of this footage, besides their individual node trees that I've created, also have grain running across all of them. And so again, H.264 4K, basically all of it played back super smoothly. H.265 4K also played back super smoothly. And so far, I've actually worked on 3 real-world projects that ranged from Blackmagic 6K, 4K, and some H.265 10-bit footage in 4K, of course. And all 3 of those projects with some anywhere from moderate to heavy grading, with some OFX plugins in there, some masking, some blurring, some magic mask tool. They actually played back completely smoothly. I had 0 issues. And so far the speed difference has been like great. So what thing I wanted to mention, however, is that the red footage, I've noticed it made absolutely no difference to the playback speed in this frame rate. It made no difference whether I changed this to, quarter res good, half res premium, or full res premium. It made no difference on the playback at all whatsoever. And if I turn everything off, all the adjustments off, even if I turn off the grain, absolutely everything's off. This is just a naked clip with no adjustments. See, it makes a tiny improvement, which to me that is pretty out of the ordinary. And it does that for all, both of these red clips. And also when I was playing with it, I also found that moving this media, the red raw media, to different drives, from non-solid state drive to a fast solid state drive, that also made no difference to the playback speed. Or if it did, it was maybe 1 frame faster, something like that, like a very microscopic difference, if any difference at all. So it's just, to me, kind of weird that everything is off and it's 16 frames. And then if I turn everything back on, it's a very slight difference. I feel like what would typically happen in this kind of situation, if I turn everything off like this would play back at full frame rate. And then when I add all the adjustments, especially the grain, then it might slow down significantly to what you're playing now. But even then, if I were to go here and then bring this down to say quarter res good, see, so now quarter res good, now we're at 20 frames per second. And if I go to full res, see, we're at 14. So I'm playing this back at the full res quality of 6K. If I go down to premium, you see 13.5 frames. The half res good, 13.5 frames. And then the half res good again, and when I go down to quarter res, this makes the biggest difference. If I turn everything off, same exact frame rate of 20, and then if I turn everything back on, you see it's a very minor difference. So I just found this kind of interesting. I'm not sure why that's happening, or if it's going to be fixed with a software update in the future. It's just interesting to see how the red performs. The decode quality, this is what I was keeping it on. I feel like the decode quality on my older Intel-based system with an external GPU, the decode quality made a big difference on playback, and also, and having this many nodes would have made a big difference on playback. But here you can see that 14 frames playback with all of the nodes off. And if I play it back, same playback. which I found kind of interesting. So, okay, so another thing that occurred to me is about the compression ratio of these red clips. So if I actually go here and then let's say we select this one and then we come in here into the camera settings, I can see that this clip here is a 3:1 compression ratio for the red code, which means that it's pretty uncompressed. Let's see, the one like this is 8:1, or sorry, 6:1. So that kind of explains, that could explain why this clip here plays back a little bit smoother. Here we go. See right here on the menu page, it says 20, basically not skipping. If we're just previewing it. This one's saying the same thing. This one's a little, you know, it's a little choppy, even though it says 23976. Still a little choppy. So let's see what happens if we get one of these other shots. So let's say this one here, 8:1. And then this one here is 14:1, 8K. Okay, so let's just drop those two in. Okay, so now let's just go from here. Okay, it's okay. So there we go, 8K 14:1 compression ratio. Seems to be playing a little bit better than the others. 4K 8:1. I think 8:1 is a more standard compression ratio. So this is just the clip by itself, no adjustments whatsoever. Okay, so 4:1. That one, see, so now these are playing back smoothly. No adjustments of any kind. And let's say we just turn off just the grain. And so we still have all the effects, just the grain. So the grain is making a big difference on the playback. So it just kind of showed, you know, the amount of power that this system does have. So anyway, that's just kind of, to me, it was really interesting. And if I go into now the settings here, and let's say I switch this and I want to work in a 4K environment. There we go, and I play back. This is an HD clip. Obviously in 4K, now it drops down to 10. If I switch this to say even half res good, again, very small difference in the playback. And red footage has always been something that really drains DaVinci Resolve. It really, you know, doesn't really play back too smoothly. And also, you know, on a lot of Apple systems, it's always been something that just plays back extremely slow no matter what you do, unless you have, you know, a very customized system specifically for red footage. I mean, there are ways to make this, you know, playback smoother just by going to these playback settings, render cache, you know, smart render cache, things like that, creating, you know, doing things here with the playback options that we have in Resolve. But really, I'm just seeing how it plays back just the raw footage, some adjustments, some grain, something that might be a typical grade, and we'll see what happens here. And then this next clip, which was always playing back a little bit faster, 12.5 frames. And then let's see the Blackmagic raw in a 4K sequence. There we go, 21, so. And I would say this grade that I applied is a typical grade. This is the Blackmagic Raw Ultra HD. I would say this is a typical grade, maybe bordering on a heavy grade. So an H.264, 21.5 frames per second, and then H.265 playing back at 20 frames per second. Okay, so let's say we just grab a couple of these, and let's say we turn off 3 nodes. There we go, and let's see what happens here. So full frame rate, full frame rate. So now we're talking about, you know, playing it back at, which that to me, that just pretty much means that if we do work in a HD timeline and play back with a few, you know, and again, the grain is, I feel like the grain is probably part of what's really affecting this heavily. You can see this. And again, the red footage, not really affected much. No matter what we do, it just kind of decides to play back at the same frame rates within, you know, of course, this always played back at 24 at the HD timeline settings. Okay, so now for the last thing we're going to do is I'm going to jump over here to the deliver page. And so this is a 30-minute in 2-frame project with, again, a mixture of all of these different shots from ProRes to Red to Blackmagic. I'm now going to see how long it takes to export this 30-minute project with mixed media in RAW with a pretty realistic to heavy grade applied to it with some grain, just to see how long it would take on this system. You can see H.265. You can see I'm going to export in H.265, Ultra HD, and for the advanced settings, I am forcing to highest quality and also forcing the Bayer to highest quality. And I am exporting it to a solid state drive. And I'm going to render this and then come back when it is done with the report of how quickly it exported this. Okay, so we're back and it finished exporting, and it actually took 35 minutes and 48 seconds to export this entire 30-minute sequence. So I also actually did a comparison, and I do have the 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 processor and 16 gigs of RAM. And on that one, the exact same project with the same settings took 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 36 seconds. So the big difference between that and this one, the M1 Max, which only took 35 minutes and 48 seconds. That's a big jump. So for any of you who have a M1 MacBook Pro, the basic M1 processor, that kind of gives you a little bit of a comparison. If you're thinking of upgrading, or if you're just wondering how much faster the Mac Studios are compared to the 13-inch MacBook Pros. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the two. Okay, so that's the video. I just wanted to wrap things up and just kind of let you know my personal opinion now that I've actually had a little bit of time to use the computer and, like I said, work on a couple of real world projects. And so what I would say at this point is the Mac Studio with the M1 Max processor is a great system. It's very fast. I feel like just working with it, you know, editing everything from, you know, Blackmagic footage to H.265 footage and some red footage. For your typical project, I noticed a massive difference from my older system, and I noticed a massive difference from the M1 MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of RAM, and that one to me was always, you know, especially for the price, crazy fast and a really great computer. Things that I noticed right away with this computer as I was using it is that I was just working faster. I was applying, you know, more nodes, experimenting a little bit more now that I knew that, you know, things like OFX plugins and grain and light filters and lens refraction stuff and, you know, the face detection stuff. Once I knew that that would render out and work really quickly and that I could play with it, I find myself doing things now that I didn't do before, maybe because I knew that, you know, rendering out, you know, some sort of face tracking thing or some OFX plugin, you know, would maybe take too long. As far as who is this for and and how it would work in a color grading or post-production or, you know, as a colorist, I would say this is a great system. I'd say for your average editor, if you're just buying this to edit 4K, 5K, 8K, whatever it might be, I think in the edit window, because the edit window does work faster because it's not processing things the way the color tab is working. As an editor, I think you'll be great, especially if you use some of the optimization settings like the half-res proxy mode, using the cache files or the smart caching, things like that. You may not even have to use that, honestly, in a lot of situations. I think you'll be great. For color grading, I think unless, like you saw in the video, you're working with very high-end media and doing a ton of nodes and applying things like heavy grain, which even that, with that being said, what I applied and the grain that I applied, I think the system did great. And I think there's very few systems that would play that back extremely smoothly in real time. And I did notice that the very few times that I did use the, say, smart cache or the user cache, that the system rendered the cache files really fast, so that it didn't feel like I was slowing down or cutting into my efficiency at all. I feel like it rendered the clips very fast and then it played back very smooth in real time. And overall, it was just a great system. A few things though that I did want to point out that I didn't bring up in the video is one, OBS Studio, which is my screen recording software that was running in the background, and afterwards in more tests that I did on my own, I did notice that that software does use a good amount of processing power. So, I would imagine if that was completely off, it did play a little bit smoother. So the OBS Studio screen recording software did affect that a little bit. And then the last thing is that I was checking out also the activity monitor, and this is the 32 gig system, and playing with it using the exact same project that you saw, I noticed that the system was not using as much of the 32 gigs as I thought. So part of me was thinking, oh, I wonder how, obviously the M1 Ultra would be faster and that kind of thing, but also based off a ton of research and videos that I've done and I've seen, a lot of it has shown that bumping up to 64 gigs made no difference or just marginal, maybe slight improvements. And looking at the activity monitor for this project, I noticed that I think it was only using something like 30 gigs for the 32. It might be different, but basically it was not using the entire amount. There was actually some RAM that was still unused, which I thought was pretty interesting too. So that's it. I hope you got something out of this. I hope it helps you decide whether you're going to go with this or the Ultra, or maybe just stick with what I think is great for a lot of people. Probably most people are just going with the M1 iMac or the M1 MacBook Pro would probably be more than enough for a lot of people too. But again, if you like this video, subscribe, like it, and let me know what you thought in the comments. Anything else you'd like to see regarding color grading or testing anything out, and I will see y'all later.